Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 245. Before we get into our conversation, I wanted to take just a minute to put in a plug for an upcoming event we're really excited about, and that is the Our Hearts Are Home Conference for Bereaved Parents. It's scheduled for April 25th and 26th in Lynchburg, Virginia, and it will be an amazing opportunity to hear some great speakers, many of whom have been guests on this podcast. They'll be addressing a wide variety of topics related to child loss, all from a sound biblical perspective. You can attend this event either in person or join us online, and it will be recorded so it can be watched later if you're already committed elsewhere that weekend. Brad and I will be there, and we would love to have the opportunity to meet you for the first time or get reconnected if we've met you previously. You can find all the information and register on their website at ourheartsareHome.org/spring-conference, and I'll be putting that link in the show notes. The cost is very affordable, and if finances are tight right now, there are scholarships available. Don't miss this amazing opportunity. Now, today's episode features a conversation with my friend Nanette Klinect. We discuss the beautiful and miraculous story of her daughter Katie's adoption, the tragic accident that changed everything, and the hard and holy privilege she had to walk her home to heaven. With honesty, faith, and even a touch of humor, Nanette reflects on grief, healing, and the ways she continues to see God's hand in her story. Hi, Nanette. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. I think I'm most excited about getting to chat with you because I've missed you. You're a wonderful person and so encouraging. So I'm excited.
Yes, I have been excited too. You know, you're one of the people who came to one of our very early While We're Waiting weekends before we had the refuge, back when we were doing it at Family Farm Christian Day Camp. So you and I go way back.
And that was the one where Paul and I at the Christian Family Day Camp, the men slept on like in one room, the women slept in another one. And Paul
Uh-huh.
felt like he and I would need one another. So we brought an air mattress and slept in our van for that weekend. And what we didn't realize is that an air mattress absorbs cold and will suck the heat from your body. So the second night, the temperatures dropped up there and we froze that night. And we
Oh my goodness. You've never told me that.
no, we learned very quickly to carry a thick comforter to put between ourselves and the air mattress. We actually love doing that. I mean, that's how we go camping. But we just from where we are, I don't know that we get that cold in November. That was an issue for us before that. So, but we love. I mean, it was a sweet, sweet time, and it was wonderful to be with people who just knew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. So let's get started by giving you an opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
So I live in Social Circle, Georgia. We just moved here about 9 months ago from Decula, Georgia, and both of those cities are about an hour outside of Atlanta, Georgia. We lived in Decula for almost 40 years. We raised our family there. I have 11 kids. I homeschooled for 34 years. And I mean, it was a sweet life, but the area, I like the outdoors. Like I like the big wide open spaces. And where we lived, it's Gwinnett County was not big wide open spaces anymore unless you went to a park. It was very turned into a lot of subdivisions. So we moved to Social Circle, which is, I think, a lot of bereaved parents. When you think about moving from the house that you raised your child that died in, it's pretty overwhelming. The Lord, I just want to, throw this in for free, not on the questionnaire, but the Lord was very kind. And there were like little things about our new house that have reminded me of Katie. She loved horses. I live across the street from a horse pasture. And just, it was not because the area had changed so much in the almost 11 years since she passed away. It didn't feel like I was leaving her presence behind. And I know that sounds weird, but it's like we had lost so much. Like her coffee shop had changed, her church had changed location. All of those things, when you lose one after another, it ceases to hold your child any longer. And that's how I felt about moving, which is not at all on your questionnaire, but throwing that one in for free. But so my husband and I are essentially empty nesters. Our youngest three kids, one of them is disabled, intellectually disabled, and she'll always be with us. Then I have a son who's a senior at Georgia Tech, and he graduates in May. And when he gets his big boy job, he will fly away. Honestly, he lives downtown at the on campus, and we don't see him unless we ask him to come visit us. He's just that busy. And we have a daughter who lives at home, and she will be out this summer. She's moving out this summer, most likely. I mean, that's the game plan now is she's moving out and she will never come home again, except to visit and take care of old parents.
Mm. That's a big change after raising 11 children in your home.
Listen, I tell my kids all the time, I'm really done with this end of an era thing. My daughter says I always mispronounce it era. Did I get it right, Jill?
I think you did.
Oh, good.
End of an era.
End of an era, because it just feels like every time I turn around I'm 61 at this age, it feels like the end of something. So, but it's the beginning of something else. And that's what I just keep telling myself. It's a new season.
Yeah, that's right. So we're here today to talk about Katie. I know she was adopted, and I would love to hear her adoption story.
I love telling this story. We had three kids at the time, and we were fostering healthy newborns up for adoption. And the agency had an international program. And they called out of the blue because at the time, my husband's company that he worked for provided health insurance for foster kids, which is like unheard of these days.
Yeah.
And so the agency said they were bringing a baby from India for a family in Alabama that had some medical issues, and the family wanted an American doctor to assess her. Like I said, the way this worked out would never happen today because they've changed laws and stuff. But so Katie was brought from India for this family, and we were going to foster her for about 3 months while her medical needs were assessed. And the family was going to adopt. And when we got to the airport, we picked her up at Hartsfield, Atlanta. And my husband just looked at her and he said, I don't see how any baby this sick can live. She was in
Mm.
much worse shape than anybody predicted. She weighed 13 pounds at 13 months. She couldn't sit up. She didn't make any vocal sounds. Every picture of a baby that's been left in a crib from every third world country that you've ever seen, not necessarily that India's third world, but at the time, it was just very clear that Kate was very neglected. And so we brought her home, and initially, when we took her to the doctor, he was very grim. The initial diagnosis was very grim, and he said she's going to die. He gave her less than a year to live. So the family in Alabama, it's not called disruption. Disruption is where you adopt the child, they're in your home, and then you give them back, which is like a divorce. They declined the referral, which is like breaking off an engagement.
Okay.
And so they declined the referral, which was really put the agency in a very awkward place because she was already in this country. So we said we wanted her, to die with a family. We wanted her to die knowing the love of a mom and to die in a mother's arms. And so we started the adoption proceedings, and we kind of went in the back door on a lot of things, and it never could be done again. But with love and good nutrition and good medical care, everything started falling off. And so the end diagnosis was beta thalassemia, which is what they knew she had. And she lived her life getting a blood transfusion every 2 to 3 weeks and did some therapies to, with that were not, I mean, she lived a very full and active and you wouldn't have picked her out of the crowd as having anything wrong. In fact, there are thalassemics now living into their 60s that are grandparents and ride motorcycles and run marathons. So her blood disease ended up being not a big deal at all. One phrase that she told people that I just love, she would say, thalassemia is a big part of my body, but a small part of my life.
Mm,
And
I
she
love that.
really lived that. She really, really lived that out. So we adopted her, and she was great and went through elementary school and high school, and she went to college, and I really felt like the Lord was going to use her adoption story to really preach the gospel, because she had been rejected, and the child that had been rejected was restored to life. And in the Hallmark movie I wrote in my head, it was going to end with her leading millions to the Lord with this testimony story. And so she went to college and she dropped out the middle of her junior year because she just didn't feel like that was where the Lord wanted her. And I argued with her, and I was pretty, like, no, no, don't do it. But it ended up exactly what she needed to do. And so she was going to school to be a hairstylist so she could work mom hours. And she was very active in her church. She was a children's worship leader at her church. And then through a family camp organization we were a part of, she was a youth leader. And really, not just for the week of camp or the time at camp, but throughout the year, she maintained contact with those kids and went to, their sports, their performances, met them for coffee, and really poured her life into those kids. So, it was the Hallmark movie I wrote in my mind up until April 4th of 2014.
That's amazing. And she was also stunningly beautiful, I have to say, from seeing her pictures.
She was, wasn't she? Oh my
Yes.
goodness. I didn't even realize like that would be one of the things I would grieve when she
Mm,
passed, because it was so cool to walk into a room with her. I mean, she was head turning. Like, we would walk in and she was noticed by everybody because she was so beautiful. And so I didn't realize that would be something I would grieve, is watching her get noticed for this beauty that God had given her.
mhm. Yeah, beautiful inside and out, I should say, too.
She truly was.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. So talk about what happened in the spring of 2014.
So it was April 4th of 2014, and my other daughter, my intellectually disabled daughter, was actually in the children's hospital. She was having some issues. And I got a call from a friend of mine that also had kidney issues. And when I saw the numbers, when I saw Sylvia's name, I thought, oh, that's so sweet. She's calling to check on Anna. But it was actually because Sylvia was with my other friend that Katie was babysitting for. And it was more of an acquaintance friendship. And so she didn't have my number. But so then I talked to her and she said Kate had been in an accident at her home. So I said, okay. And she said that the paramedics had been called, that 911 was rolling. And I said, give them my number. If they have any questions, tell them to call me because of her thalassemia. And what hospital do you think they'll go to? And I'll start heading that way. I'll make preparations. And so that's kind of where I thought, oh, I thought it was going to be a complication of thalassemia that I was really odd, that I hadn't planned on. And then I'm making preparations, and then the paramedic called me and he asked basic questions. And my son is a paramedic here at a local Atlanta area paramedic. And I heard the tone in his voice, and I realized he had his game voice on,
Mm.
that this was serious. So I gave him the information. I hung up the phone. My daughter Anna, that was in the hospital, was crying because she hospitalizations were very difficult for her. And so I'm calling the nurse. Fortunately, she had been admitted onto the floor that her older sister worked on. So the coworkers just adopted her. They called Child Life and had Child Life come in with her, and I just hit the road. And for any listener that lives in the Atlanta area, this is going they'll understand the miracle of this. I made it from Scottish Rite, from Choate Scottish Rite campus to Northeast Georgia in Gainesville on Friday afternoon of spring break in 45 minutes.
Wow.
And that was like a miracle. God just kind of cleared the way. Before I left the hospital, I had talked to my son, who is a paramedic. He was on shift and he was closer to the hospital and he didn't answer. So I sent him a text and I said, call now 911. And that is our signal with each other that we need, like, call immediately.
Yeah.
So he was actually coming back from a call, backing the ambulance into the bay. And he called me and I told him what had happened. And he said, what do you want me to do? Go or stay? And I said, I want you to go. I said, I just have a feeling. Can you get there? He said, I'm on it. And then we hung up and I was driving just praying. And I got a couple of miles from the ER and I called him and I said, what's the scoop? He said, well, they let me go right back because of my uniform. I mean, it opened
Mm.
doors. And he gave me an assessment. And though it sounded really serious, it did not sound terrible. I mean, it did. I'm trying, like on a scale of 1 to 10, it sounded like a 7, but we never imagined it would be the 10.
Yeah.
So I got there and I walked back to the emergency department to the room. They were taking x rays. She was helping shift her body for the x rays. She knew I was there. She couldn't communicate. She was out of it, but sort of there. But they were putting her on a vent and protecting the airway. And so, but I could tell she knew who I was. And I told her that everybody had been called and we were all coming and we were praying for her. So then they took her to surgery. She had a traumatic brain injury. She had been on a bicycle and ran into a tree, and she had traumatic brain injury. And they took her up to surgery, and everybody was very casual. They were going to remove her skull to let the brain swell a little bit to relieve any pressure. But they said the pressure wasn't bad. They just were doing a preemptive surgery. So okay, sounds great. And then we go up to the ICU waiting room. And at that point, people are coming in. That's one thing I want to talk about for every bereaved parent who's had a similar situation. And all of a sudden, you lose control over the narrative because of social media. All of a sudden, people you don't even know are showing up because they saw it on social media. I just wish I could give you a hug. I get it. When you're in a terrible place, having people jump in that it's so overwhelming.
Mm.
So while she's in surgery, all of a sudden, people multiplied like mushrooms do after a rain. It was just people I didn't know, people I did, that was wonderful, but just a lot that just showed up. So the neurosurgeon gets off the elevator. We recognize him because I'd met him right before surgery. We walk over to him, and by this point, my husband and my kids are just there. And we said, hi, we're Katie's family. How did it go? And he goes, very bad. And I mean, it was this abrupt. And my husband said, well, you meant for quality of life or survival? He said, yes, both. And then he turned around and walked back on the elevator.
Wow.
And we just stood there. And I turned around and I just started crying. Like, not crying. That's not even the right word. That visceral, guttural cry. And I sank down and somebody shoved a chair underneath my legs. And my oldest daughter, who was pregnant with my first grandchild, was there. And I'll never forget this. As she's cradling my head to her belly, I felt my granddaughter kicking me. And it felt like such a comfort that there was life. And so, it just brought comfort. And I just remember praying, Lord, we don't know how this is going to end, but I just quoted what I remembered of Job, though you slay me, yet will I praise you. And we made that declaration as a family. We would praise the Lord, and however things looked, that we were missionaries called to the ICU waiting room. And we would take that calling very seriously and trust the Lord with the details of it. So that's what happened. For the doctor came back and talked to us later that night, and he said that everything seemed fine, but when he took part of her skull off, things took a turn for the worse. And he said, he didn't have much hope. And then she survived the night, and she had some intentional movements that the nurse was in there, and she goes, that looks pretty intentional to me. And so they actually increased her sedation because they wanted her brain to rest. But she documented it. And the next morning, the neurosurgeon came in and he said he had hope. We all had hope. And everything looked great until 96 hours after the accident. Because we knew this was a marathon, people were going home at night to sleep, and we were taking turns being there with her. And I was the one there that night. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I hear all the bells and whistles going off. And the nurse was in there, and I just started praying for her. I woke up and I was praying for the nurse and the doctors. And, I just felt so religious praying for these people, thinking, oh gosh, I didn't want to jump up and say, what's going on? What's going on? Because I knew in a situation like that, the last thing you need is a hysterical parent. And I was patting myself on the back for being so mature to pray through this situation when the Lord just laid it on my heart to pray the 23rd Psalm. And I thought, oh, that's such a promise, Lord. The Lord is Katie's shepherd. She shall not want. And I'm like claiming it as the victory lap song until I got to the she walks through the valley of the shadow of death. And I stopped and I said, Lord, I won't pray that. I will not pray the shadow of death. And it was just this internal struggle with just laying my hopes and my dreams and my Hallmark movie before the
Mm.
Lord. And then I prayed and I said, though Katie walks through the valley of the shadow of death, she's not alone. The Lord is walking with her. And I knew at that moment we lost her. But that God was with her. And that really helped us because she made it through the night. But I called my husband at like 6 that morning, and I told him we lost Kate. I stayed up for the rest of the night reading Kate's Bible. It was the size of the palm of my hand. It had a font size of 2. And I was reading all of the verses she had underlined, and there were so many of them. I remember thinking, man, Kate, this has taught me a lesson. I will never get a Bible with small print like this. I don't care that it fit in your purse. We'll get a new book bag. Like that was just, I learned a
Right.
lot. But I called my husband. I said, we lost Kate last night. And he said, she died. And I said, no, but this is what happened. And he said, what are we going to do? And I said, Kate will tell us what to do. And then my oldest daughter, who's a nurse, and she was pregnant, and she called me, and she said the same thing. What are you going to do? And I said, Kate will tell us. So she called my husband and said, Mom's had a psychotic break. She thinks Kate's going to tell us what to do. And so everybody came to the hospital that day, and we were with Kate. And my oldest daughter called me and apologized. She said, Mom, I thought you were crazy, but I realized there's such a peace. Kate really is letting us know the timing of things and what's going to do. And I know that we've lost her. She's not going to survive this, but it's going to be a sweet time. And I just so appreciated her saying that because we needed that kind of promise. So that was Wednesday. Thursday, we kept watching more and more brainstem function. She lost the gag reflex, corneal reflex, just one after another. pupils blown and dilated. Everything just kept getting worse. There was not one time that it felt stable. That Friday morning, my husband and I talked to the trauma surgeon and said, it's very clear that things are not looking good. And it was during the brain, so he was checking her, and he was checking what brainstem function she had. And the only thing she had left was deep pain response. And I watched it, and I knew that it was time, because I could not, that was the only loving thing I could do for my daughter, is to let her go. I mean, it's like watching that to survive only feeling pain just seemed like the cruelest thing in the world. So we started praying, like the timing. We talked to the surgeon, and our pastor at the time had gone to get her car, and he brought back her backpack, which had her journals in it. And when we read her journals, it just brought another piece of peace to us, another layer that this was okay. And then a local pastor who we knew, who was our friend, he and his wife showed up at the hospital that morning, and their son had had a traumatic brain injury and survived, but is a total care patient. His wife has one of the sweetest little Southern accents. And I just remember her looking at us and saying, well, we don't really know what's going on. We just felt like the Lord wanted us to come and tell you that if we'd have a choice and have known what we know, we would have let him go. We would have just let him die. We wouldn't have worked so hard. She said it so sweetly, but yet I knew it was from the heart. And it's hard to explain unless you walk through traumatic brain injury and know like what the end point is. So that brought another piece of peace to us. And then we let Kate's boyfriend, and they were planning to get married. There was not a ring and a date, but they thought of themselves as engaged. We sent them in the room with her journals, and we said, we want you to just be alone with Kate and read this and pray, because we knew this would be hard on him. And he came out and he said that, he goes, we've got to let her go, don't we? And I said, we do. And then her best friend read her journals, and she was the same way. She, like, it just, we watched God work his perfect peace through all of the inner circle of everybody that we knew we needed to let Kate go. And then that night, her youth group that she led, the worship team, showed up with their instruments, not knowing anything that was going on. They showed up, and we told them, this is what's going on. Would y'all be okay with coming in, and let's lead, let's have worship. And so they came in and we sang, and her pastor, she was an adult. She went to her own church. Her pastor and the associate pastor showed up. It was a really big deal to my oldest son to have some kind of liturgical ceremony to, like, the final rites kind of thing. So they came in, and it was so funny. The head pastor had just gotten back from a week at the beach. He looked tan, his blonde hair, and like everything about him was like so put together and so just yuppie-ish looking. And then the associate pastor had been working in the yard. He looked like a homeless youth pastor who lived in a box under the overpass.
Right.
And it was just so funny watching both of them, and just how respectful they were about the time. And our family has a really warped sense of humor. The pastor looked at me, and he had the oil, and he said, is it okay if I anoint her with some oil? I said, I don't know. You might kill her. And he just froze. And my son, the paramedic, just started laughing. And we all started laughing, because it was like, what? Of course, anoint her with oil. Because
Sure.
what could you possibly do to her now? And so he did, and everybody left but our family, and we disconnected life support and allowed natural death. And that was, and I say this, that it's a hard and holy privilege to walk somebody to the gates of heaven. And, it is to walk with them and to know what it means is hard. For April in 2014, on April 11th, I walked my daughter to the gates of heaven for her last breath of life. And on April 28th, I was there with my daughter during childbirth, and I was there for my granddaughter's first breath of life. I will never, I thank God for the privilege of being at the two most sacred moments of a person's life, the first breath and that last breath, and to truly understand that our life is just a dash that we give him to do with as he wills. And that was just such a sacred moment for me, and I'm just so thankful that God has allowed me to have that.
Yeah, it really is a gift. We had that experience with Hannah too, to be there for her last breath. And wow, it was hard. It was brutal. But I'm glad we were there. I'm glad that we got to walk her home. That's a gift for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't have chosen it any other way, but you can't walk through something like that without it, redesigning the network of your life, or the things, your value system.
Right. Yeah. It completely changes your life. That's for sure. So at the time that this podcast airs, you will be approaching 11 years since Katie went to heaven. How would you say that your grief has evolved over these years?
So the first thing is, before Katie, I would look at people who had lost children. I would think, "Oh, it's been a year. I bet they barely think about it. I bet they're over it."
I thought the same thing.
It's like, man, I'm
So wrong.
so judgmental. Um, this may be an encouragement, or I hope it's not a discouragement. For about 3 years, every day that I woke up, I thought, "Gosh, the pain didn't kill me." That's the greatest shock of my life, is how painful it was. I mean, it was palatable, but
Yeah.
yet I would go out, nobody could see that I had had every appendage cut off in a traumatic amputation. And so they couldn't know that every heartbeat, I was like, wow, my heart's still beating. I really thought the pain would rip me apart. I would wake up in the morning and think, wait, I remember feeling my arms and legs, thinking, surely something has to have fallen off, because everything hurt. And it was a pain nobody saw. And so about 3 years, I tell people I started to see color again, but I started to wake up and not feel like I was going to implode. And I would wake up thinking, every step, I didn't have to think through every step as being painful. It just became less sharp, no less real, no less of the missing, but I just didn't feel like I was going to implode anymore. And that would be the best thing. The hard thing about that is, it is a daily struggle for me. With my head, I know that my children's safety is not contingent on me knowing where they are at all times and knowing how they're doing. But yet, because I'm so afraid of that pain of losing another child, my kids are so kind to me because they let me know their locations. They check in with me. They know that it's a thing for me. And even I have a son who lives in Budapest, Hungary. He calls me every day just to let me know they're all fine. He gives me a rundown of his day, and he stays in contact because he knows it's a thing for me. So that would be the thing, is it's left some marks, like I'm fragile as far as the safety of my kids, but by the same token, I experience real joy now. I don't feel like everything's falling gonna fall off at any given second.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big change from where you were at the beginning. What advice would you give to someone who is at the very beginning that, like you said, wakes up every day, not even being able to believe that they're still here, that the pain hasn't killed them yet? What would you say to that mom or dad that's right there at the beginning, like you were? What advice would you give them?
Do the next right thing. and I, do the next right thing. And the next right thing might just be getting out of bed, getting a shower. It would be, just do that. And I would say, be kind to yourself. That was one thing I kept thinking, I should be doing better. I should be doing better. I'm a Christian. I should be doing better. I need to trust the Lord more. I should be doing better. Now I look back on it and I see how God carried me. I didn't need to do anything. I just needed to rest in Him. I had expectations of myself that God never called me to. And I think expectations that we feel and I don't want to slam the body of Christ, but in the grief department, some work needs to be done.
Yes.
And so for me, I would just say be kind to yourself and be patient. And if people are expecting you to jump back into ministry or jump back into that and jump back into this, and don't bow to that. It's okay to take the time that you need. And as I said, it was 3 years for me. And I've talked to a lot of bereaved parents. And I mean, Jill, you're like the professor of this. 3 years seems to be about the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I knew why 3 years is marked. Some people it's a little shorter, some people it's a little longer. I think there are different things that are a factor in that. But 3 years is pretty much the central number. It took me 9 weeks to be able to go grocery shopping. I love to cook. I mean, I've taught classes on how to save money on groceries. I love to cook. I love to teach. I couldn't even go to the grocery store. I could not make a decision what to cook. I don't even know that I knew how to boil water. I was
Yeah.
so fractured and fragmented. And there the only cohesive thought I could put together was I have to keep trying for my other kids.
Yeah. Fractured and fragmented. Those are two really good words that describe how I felt, I know, in those early days and months and years. For me, I felt a little bit of a turn at the second year. But in a way, I feel like my journey maybe is different because with Hannah, we knew that unless the Lord intervened,
Mhm.
she would be leaving us for a year. And so we grieved a lot before she left. And I know you had some of that too with Katie, but not as long as we did. But I know it's different times for everyone. And whatever time it takes you is the time it takes you.
See, that's what I'm saying, like plus or minus 3 years. So we're gonna count like in dog years. No, I just that's what I'm saying. There's a plus or minus to it. I think a lot of
Yeah,
it's gonna be you had that year to kind of pre-grieve that
right.
we were shocked because Katie was perfectly healthy. She had gone out to lunch with my other daughter a couple of days beforehand. I had talked about 2 hours before the accident. And I mean, it just there's a plus or minus, and I certainly think there are situations that are more complex, that carry more trauma, that you're going to need more time to process and to work your heart and mind around it. But I would say that there's ministry in the process, and that even though like I didn't feel like that I was proclaiming the gospel to a housefly. I was
Right.
it's like, I mean, I could not imagine how God was using me. But I would tell you, in your brokenness, I think that God uses us more. I mean,
Hmm.
that's how, in my brokenness, I look back now, those first 3 years, and I see how God used me in ways I couldn't see myself at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I am sure that's true. And I think even just for people to watch us from the outside and see that even though we're struggling, we're still talking to the Lord, we haven't given up on Him. Those kinds of things speak volumes to people, I think. And we're not even aware of it at the time because we're just still so caught up in our grief. I think the life of a bereaved parent speaks to those around them. And we may never know how many people are watching us or how many people are touched by our journey.
So in my community, 2 12-year-old boys were killed last week in an ATV accident.
Oh,
And over the course of the 11 years that Kate's died, I've had a couple of friends who've lost children. Tragedies happen in our community, where young people are lost. And I'm so thankful that and this is when I look at the ministry we have as bereaved parents, the ability to intercede. When I found out about those boys, I immediately began praying for the parents having to go to the funeral home to pick out the casket for their kids. Or,
Yes.
it's two families, because like here you are, you're most impaired that you have ever been in your life. And you go and they bring you a 3-ring binder asking you to commit to spend thousands. I don't buy a blender without checking reviews. And
Right.
here, like, I'm looking at all these choices and the pressure, because you want to do, like, there's a sense I want to do right by my child. I want to be, her favorite color is purple. Well, of course, we have to get the purple casket with the velvet lining. And the whole time all this is running through your mind, you're sitting there, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be
Right.
here. And so we have a gift as bereaved parents to intercede. Wherever you are on your journey, there is somebody who's just a couple of steps behind you that now you know how to pray for, and how to pray with knowledge and wisdom and with compassion and empathy. And I think that's one of the gifts of grief that I'm very thankful for, is now interceding for people going through that kind of trial.
That's such a great story. I'm so glad you included that, and about having to make those kinds of decisions about caskets and things like that when you are least equipped to make those kinds of decisions. That's got to be so hard. Again, because our journey was different with Hannah having cancer, we were able to think through some of those things. Even though we hoped we would never need them, we had the blessing, I guess you could call it, of thinking through them while she was actually still with us. I can't imagine having to make those kind of decisions immediately after the loss of your child.
I'll add that it did help me too. Our youth pastor called and he told me about it. And I said, well, I'm going to give you 3 quick, easy tips. I said, if what you're about to say starts with, I know, at least, or you should, don't say it, because there is nothing that you are going to say following those 3 statements that will be helpful. Even, I know you must be hurting. Hearing somebody say that for some reason feels like a slap. It just is. And I know people want to help, and it's a sweet friend, and I don't want anybody to judge, because I know her heart. But after Kate died, she goes, well, at least it wasn't one of your biological kids.
Oh,
Okay, no
oh,
judge, no judge. We
sure.
listen and we don't
I-
know.
I'm
I
trying not to judge. Yeah,
But I knew her heart. Her
sure,
heart
of
was,
course.
she wanted to say anything that could possibly help. And we talked about it afterwards, and she said, as soon as I said it, I thought that was like the stupidest thing in the world to say. But she was desperate to try to make me feel better. And that's what
Yeah,
I tell, there is nothing you can say or do that's going to make us feel better.
right.
The only thing you can do or say is, I'm so very sorry. May I hug you? And I'm sending a case of toilet paper to your house, because you will not go out shopping for the next 2 years of your life.
Right.
Don't ask what you can do, but just do it.
This concludes the first half of my conversation with Nanette Klinect. Next week, we'll continue the conversation as Nanette shares the scriptures that have anchored her, how she's navigated sibling grief, and the way she honors Katie's memory in her everyday life. If today's episode resonated with you, I encourage you to join us next week for more wisdom, encouragement, and hope. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to sharing the rest of our conversation with you next Wednesday.